Yesterday, I had the privilege to watch what I now regard to be one of the greatest films that I've ever seen, frankly, in my 24 years on this planet. You don't know me, but that is a pretty high claim for me to make. By what the title of this video would suggest, that was in fact Train Dreams, you can catch on Netflix by the director Clint Bentley. And before I get into a discussion of the film, I implore you, if you have not seen it, to go and watch it right now, whether this video comes as a vestige of the internet in 10 years' time, perhaps as the last video that people will be able to watch on the internet. I'm sure somewhere you'll be able to find a copy of Train Dreams. Whenever you watch this, do it right now, as I don't want to spoil it for anyone, and I want it to be a unique experience that they enter into and kind of confront without any previous thoughts of the film formed, of which I had the privilege of not having known anything about Train Dreams before I stepped into the viewing experience, and I think that is how other people should try and line themselves up to watch it. And I will be singing the praises of this film. I don't often do that for films made these days. Typically, I have to reef back in the 20th century and kind of the pre-internet age of film to find stuff that I actually enjoy, but this really touched me, and I want to use the word touch. I don't want to use I'm going to try and avoid sadness or depression or connotations that give this idea of Train Dreams as creating a sad effect on the spirit. I think what it was something that was beautiful and touching, but not necessarily tragic. The story follows a man by the name of Robert Grainer, who lives the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. He's a laborer who moves around the Pacific Northwest in America, where he goes from job to job, and very manual seasonal work that involves almost no technological implement, and he's highly unskilled. He effectively just picks up work wherever he can, and he travels out to these remote locations and helps to assist the American government and perhaps American companies as well. I think that these are contractors working for the government to assist the expansion into the West. So it's set in that era, though it's not quite as far back as what you'd imagine the West to be in the kind of the 19th century with cowboys and guns a-blazing and Indians. It's more a settled and industrial and commercial almost interpretation of what the West would be like. And the work that Robert primarily does is logging. What I loved so much about this is how suffuse with details the plot was. The piece wasn't necessarily something that was driven by the plot. It didn't really have much of a plot. Those things certainly happened, key events in Robert's life, and that kind of shape his perspective and his experience of his own life. And I think broadly it's commentary on the human condition, but we'll get to that in a minute. It was the details that made up the story for the lack of plot, and I think so many great films and books and pieces of media that you can consume, great artistic works, don't really have a plot, and that's kind of by design, because that gives the director and the people putting together whatever that piece of art the creative freedom to explore the little tiny details. Robert ultimately is a man who is ordinary. He's just like anybody else. He's a laborer living in kind of a difficult time. And the chronology of his life is fairly standard. Of course, we see most of the tragic elements that happen to him and his experience with death, losing people close to him. I think it's a commentary on grief more than anything. Robert is bereaved at a very key moment in the story, and he kind of never is able to shake that. And thereafter we see Robert purely through the lens of this grieving process, of which kind of lasts the rest of his life. But it's because the story isn't filled with action and going from place to place that it really enables the director Clint to develop the story of Robert and enrich the small details in his life. Unfortunately, in the space of this video, I'm probably not going to cover everything, but I'm going to do my best to exhaustively empty what I found so poignant. Film from the very first couple of lines caught my attention, and I knew that this was going to be something that I was interested in because it was quite philosophical. It opens with the narrator saying, and the narrator is actually voiced by Will Patton. If you've seen Remember the Titans, great film. I'd recommend everyone to chase that up. So it begins the lines from the narrator. There were once passageways to the old world, strange trails, hidden paths. You'd turn a corner and suddenly find yourself face to face with the great mystery, the foundation of all things. And even though that old world is gone now, even though it's been rolled up like a scroll and put somewhere, you can still feel the echo of it. I think there are two interpretations of this, and I was reflecting upon it. One definitely stands out to me is this is about technological progress. Over the span of Robert's life, we see him as a day laborer working with hand saws out in the middle of the wilderness. And by the end of it, when he comes to retire from logging, chainsaws are available. More profoundly, he observes the launch of a shuttle into outer space. So we're taken on this journey from in the beginning, seeing what is merely a man living in a very rugged and quite primitive state, to now being thrust into the throes of modernity and forced to confront this incredible technological development that is beyond any comprehension that Robert could possibly have. He's this uneducated, quite inarticulate man, though he definitely has these moments where he delivers these very poignant observations, but cannot fathom what he's observing. Train Dreams very much proceeds in this theme of technological development. There's even a line at some point when Robert's reflecting on one of the railway tracks that he built and that people died building, being replaced as quickly as like a couple of decades later by a superior concrete track. So you get this idea of this human futility in the face of technological expansion. And I think technology is definitely something that you can bear out in that quote. At least what I'm interpreting from this is a broader philosophical commentary, and it definitely has shades of Schopenhauer, and I'm going to explain why. I think the title of the film, Train Dreams, and this is based on a novel, it's based on a novella, in fact, written earlier that I haven't read yet, but I will be reading it after this. If I can come to grips with it, because I was so touched and moved by the film itself. But if you think about this idea in Schopenhauer of consciousness being kind of dissolved and consciousness being able to, in some small fleeting ways, apprehend this primordial oneness. Schopenhauer has the idea of the will, of course. Everything belongs to this old and original ontological position, and that we can occasionally come face to face and confront the will as it exists. You know, there are these passageways to the old world, strange trails, hidden paths. And you do come face to face with this reality, but it's only ever fleeting. And it seems like the world that you actually live in is quite remote and distinct from that, though it definitely bears shades of that original position. And Train Dreams itself, there is much to say about consciousness in this. The idea of dreaming, the idea of not being able to differentiate what is real from what is imaginary. Robert continuously is haunted by the memory and the legacy of his child and his wife, Gladys, and he's never actually able to escape them. He has these dogs that he looks after. And then they're speaking about language and what animals are capable of understanding. It almost seems to me as though it's looking at the nature of consciousness and seeing and identifying within consciousness its most perverse and unintended consequences, that we should become so aware of our own futility, of our own sufferance, and we're never able to be delivered from that. We must live in it for the rest of our life. We're condemned to live in it. And Robert has this conversation at one point with Gladys. They're speaking about what a dog could comprehend. And so when Robert asks Gladys about what a dog can comprehend, she responds, whatever it knows to do, it knows the words. So at once, I feel that human beings are caught between this tension of too much consciousness. We have a surplus of awareness and understanding. Yet at the same time, when facing these inimical forces that we don't understand. We don't bear the mental cognitive faculties to understand. We feel so incredibly limited and we're forced to suffer. Confrontation with these quite profound existential experiences. And we don't possess the necessary tools in order to work our way through them, such as what Robert experiences. He's bereft of any clue of and any purpose of where to go once he realizes with his friend who owns the convenience store that his partner and his daughter aren't going to return to him and that he has truly lost them. He is a man who has been deprived the one thing in his life that he actually enjoyed and he identified with. There is definitely something else to say about futility, and this is one of the things that comes up a lot in Train Dreams, is that we don't just see this with Robert, but we also see it with this other worker who's out there on the trail towards the beginning of the film with Robert, and he's a Chinese man who we never get the name of. We never get his backstory. We, in fact, don't know anything about him. But he is tragically murdered in this incredible act of depravity where the white workers on the railroad come and seize him and they throw him off the cliff. And what struck out to me is, in fact, as they're seizing him, Robert then comes up, presumably to lay assistance to the Chinese man, but he kicks him away. I think that's a bit of a commentary, a deliberate commentary on race there. Perhaps we, the audience, might think that Robert's fraternized with this man and that he has some sympathy and ability to empathize with him on what's happening, and the total incomprehensibility of him being targeted by the white workers. What he in fact does is become not only a bystander, but someone actively participating in the murder of this man, this poor man, and it haunts him for the rest of his life. Really is the essence of what I think the film was trying to achieve, what it was trying to get at. It's a commentary on existence, and within that, we talk about these different human emotions that we have to confront, like grief, love, loss, the feeling of purpose, contentment, trying to find satisfaction where satisfaction is very difficult to come across. But it's looking at existence, it's looking at mortality itself and the arc of the human life. And in the very end of the film, it talks about Robert dying in his sleep. We don't see his funeral. In fact, we see his cottage, his cabin in the wilderness, being completely overgrown as though years passed where someone even would have come across and realized that there was a person living here who's died. There's no significance to Robert's life, and he becomes dissolved back into the primordial unity, this Schopenhauerian will at the end of all things. And it picks up on that. It talks about in the last couple minutes of the film, on that spring day as he misplaced all sense of up and down when he's flying on the plane, he at last felt connected to it all. So there's this idea of the consciousness being reabsorbed, reintegrated back into the fluidity of nature and becoming one with it all. We also talk about the dead tree as being as important as the living one. This idea that there is this oneness in existence. And this is what Schopenhauer talks about, something adopted from Eastern philosophy. And he was in fact one of the first people to bring it across into Western philosophy and integrate it into a Kantian framework. That is our lives, our souls, our sense of self, terribly, incomprehensibly significant in the scheme of all things, that our lives should end as quietly as they began, and that we ultimately will be reabsorbed into nature, of which we will be condemned to be as insignificant as anything else. And this commentary on man's relationship to nature and our existence as being as utterly futile as anybody else's, I found very profound, and that was incredibly moving. It's something that you don't often see as an admission made of something like Netflix, who would have commissioned this film and been involved in its production, of this philosophical truth that is very difficult for people to come to terms with. I think we talk about the denial of death a lot, and people take to all sorts of actions and measures in order to reject the idea that they will die and their self will ultimately be dissolved into the nothingness, the Schopenhauerian abyss. And it's very difficult to confront that realization, so we take to all sorts of little behaviors and actions and take up tasks to busy ourselves and hopefully some way extend our legacy beyond the term of our existence. But all of that shall be ultimately proved futile. All of that at the end of time, when judgment day, then this great reckoning comes, is that it will all amount for nothing, and we will die, and our lives will be condemned to be as quiet as the time that we existed. And it's difficult to confront. Robert is forced to confront it. Fortunately, he's able to do so in the time that he exists. He has this profound moment. He's in the plane, and we get the montage of his life and all these incredible experiences that he had the joy and the thrill of living through. And he found purpose in it all. And I hope that other people see that. You can at once accept the futility of your own existence. You can find some sort of satisfaction in that very pessimistic thought. This is the idea of the heroic pessimist, and that's something I found in Ligotti. And he picks up on existential philosophy like Camus and Nietzsche, is that you recognize the total relativity, the futility of life, and yet your response to it is nevertheless affirmative. You say yes. As tragic as your life might turn out, and you might be given and dealt a hand of which is profoundly tragic, but it doesn't mean that you condemn yourself to be pessimistic in response to what is a pessimistic realization. So they're the thoughts that I wanted to leave here. There were other things that I perhaps wanted to get to. Perhaps the technological element was something that ought to be explored, because think about the rapid displacement of workers through modernity. We think about AI as rendering a lot of the workforce today redundant. So perhaps there's something to say for what Robert experienced. Maybe I'll upload other commentaries. I guess this is what this was. It was a bit of a review at the same time. Definitely wasn't like a critical cinematic dissection of Train Dreams, but just me waxing lyrical about stuff that I found interesting about it. And perhaps this will resonate with you. Perhaps it won't. I don't know who this is going to reach. Have a good day. Thanks for watching.